December 18th, 2018. I think that's right. I said that I was going to do one of these while wearing a reindeer onesie. So here I am wearing a reindeer onesie. But I also said that there would be a cat on camera, so I'm not going to make a liar of myself, and I'm going to put the cat on camera. There you go. Okay, cat on camera. No lies told. Okay, so today I'm going to show how to build a Twitch IRC chatbot in Pony from scratch. So buckle up and get ready. So first of all, a little talk about Pony. Pony is a compiled programming language. It's actor-based. It's a language that I use at work, and I really like it. People have sometimes asked, okay, what's the sweet spot for Pony? Why would I want to use Pony? Well, one thing that Pony is really good for is writing event-driven programs, and especially event-driven networked programs. So something happens, you get an event into the system, and then you process that. So that sounds a whole lot like what you would do if you were writing a chat program, and actually it is. So writing a chat program, I think, shows a lot of the nice things that Pony will let you do. So I think the thing to do is get started. I've got a couple of pages here that are open. I've got the Internet Relay Chat Protocol page specification, and I've got the Twitch chatbots and IRC guide. So Twitch provides a IRC bridge to their chat functionality, and so if you want to write a bot, you can basically plug into that. And that's really nice because there are a whole lot of IRC libraries out there, and so you can kind of use basically whatever language you want to write your bot, because there are so many good libraries for doing that. So we're going to completely eschew the libraries here and use just TCP connection and Pony, and look at what that looks like as you build it up. So let's start with the first thing. How do we connect? Let's see here. Let's find what server we want to connect to. Okay, so the IRC server, we're not going to bother with SSL for now, so we're going to connect to this server. To authenticate, you need a password and a nickname. And so there's a little sample thing down here that kind of shows the flow. Once you connect to the IRC server, you send your password in this format and your nickname as your nickname. And then Twitch should respond to you with a welcome message. So let's start by doing that. Let's do the first thing first and just create a program that connects to the IRC server. So I've already created a directory here. I've got a file with my credentials in it. I've sourced that file, so hopefully I shouldn't have to show anybody what my credentials are. I've got an account for a chatbot. So let's create a main.pony file, and let's start looking at what we need to do a chatbot. So we start off, as we always do, with actor main and a constructor. So this is kind of like your main function in other programming languages. This is the first thing that gets run and kicks off everything else that's going to happen in your program. Great, cool. So should be able to print out a hello message. Okay, so really what we want to do, let's make sure that everything's just set up correctly, and we'll just run ponyc in the directory. It should compile everything. Great. So let's get our credentials out of the credentials file. So those are, I'm setting environment variables with those. So I should be able to call env, that's our, that's a object that represents the outside world in Pony. And so that includes the arguments that are passed to the program, the environment variables, all the other things. And let's take a look at the source for env, and I'm trying to remember how to access environment variables. I don't do that very often, so let's see what it is. Looks like it's vars. So there's an array of strings called vars, and so let's do this. We've got an array. So I don't remember what the format is. Let me I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna unset my password just so that none of you terrible people looks at it. And we're just going to print out all of the environment variables here first. Just that I think it's just variable equals and then the value, but I don't remember. So we're just going to create a little for loop that loops over all the values, and we're going to print them all out. We're going to compile that. Yep. Okay. Got a little secret Emacs window here that I'm using to make some changes to things. So let's I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit my credentials here real quick. Okay. And I'm going to source credentials. Let's run that program again. Okay, so here's my Twitch username. Famous Mr. Ed, horse joke, haha, very funny. Okay, so should be able to grab the variable that starts with Twitch username and get the rest of the value, and everything should be good. So let's say let Twitch nick equal string, and then we're just going to loop over, we're going to keep this loop here, and we're going to say if x, let's see here, let parts equal x split. So we're going to split this string on the equals sign. This will give us an array that we're calling parts that will have the parts of the string that didn't contain the equals sign. So the first part will be everything up to the equal sign, and the last part will be everything after the equal sign, assuming there's only two equal signs. And then we'll say if parts 0 equals Twitch username, then Twitch nick equals parts 1. Okay, and we're gonna wrap this whole thing up in a try block because it can raise an error if we were to access an array element that didn't exist. So basically, if we tried to read off the edge of the array, then that would raise an error, and we have to handle errors in Pony. You can't let an error escape from a behavior, and so we're just going to print an error message. And we're just going to print out our Twitch nickname. Let's build that, make sure it builds. Okay, so that worked. We're going to do the same thing here to get the password. Okay, and for obvious reasons, we're not going to print out the password. Just leave ourselves a little message here. In fact, if we don't get a password, we'll exit. And if we do get a password, we'll just print out a message saying that we got one. So we'll source our credentials file again, and we'll rebuild the program. And and we'll run it. And we got our nickname and we got our password. Okay, so that's pretty cool. All right. So now to actually do some real work. We're going to connect to the server. So let's take a look. So there's a couple of ways you can look at Pony documentation. The way I usually do it is I often just look at the source. So most package files should have a document string. So let's go into networking, and what we want is TCP connection. And so if you look here, there's this TCP connection actor. And right after that, there's 3 quotation marks, and then there's a document string. And so anything between here and the next set of 3 quotation marks is treated as documentation. And most of our packages actually have code in the documentation string, and some of them even have complete code in the documentation string. So this one happens to have a complete program that tries to connect to an Echo server and does some things when it gets connected. So what you'll see here is there are kind of 2 main parts to this. There's this myTCP connection notify class, and then down here in main we create a TCP connection and we pass it an instance of this thing. So that's kind of how the TCP connection works, is you create a class that defines the behaviors that you'd like to take place when certain things happen, when you connect, when you receive some data, or when the connection fails. So we're basically going to do this in our code. So let's start by creating a try block, and we want to create a TCP connection. And the first argument is this inv.root as ambient auth. What this does is it tells, Pony has this idea of things being capabilities secure. Basically, if you want to access the outside world in a writable manner, then you have to have this thing that's called an authentication token. And in the terms of Pony parlance, this is unforgeable, which is to say, you as a programmer can't create one of these things. This thing is only created by the runtime when your program starts up. And what this does is it allows a programmer to kind of advertise that, hey, this piece of code is going to be doing something that accesses the outside world. And so this is a way to kind of sort of protect Pony programs. So if you were using a third-party library and it required you to pass in ambient authority, you'd know that it was probably doing something interesting, and you might want to audit the code. You might want to take a look at it and see what exactly it was doing to interact with the outside world. For example, if it's trying to make a network connection, if it's a network package, that makes sense. If it's, a function that's just left padding or something like that, you might wonder why it's trying to access the internet. So the first thing we pass in is this thing. So let's just do that here. Then the next argument is our TCP connection notify. And so we're going to create a class that implements this TCP connection notify interface. And then the last 2 arguments are the name of the host and the port that you want to connect to. So let's put those in real quick. We're going to have a big blank space here. And then let's look at that Twitch documentation again. Twitch tells us that we want to connect to this, irc.chat.twitch.tv on port 6667. So let's just paste that in here. One thing that sometimes trips people up, ports are strings in Pony. Most other languages, it's an int. That's okay, it's a compiled language, so if you didn't have quotes around this number, you'd get a compilation error. All right, so this is the beginnings of the code that's going to connect to the IRC server. So let's go back, and we want to create one of these, a class that is a TCP connection notifier. So let's just do that. And we'll call it Twitch chat connection notify is TCP connection notify. Great. Okay. And before we get too far, eventually we're going to need to tell our program that it needs to use the net package, because that's where this TCP connection notify and the TCP connection class actor live. Okay, so we've started to create this class. So let's create a constructor. And we're going to pass it the nickname and the password that we want to use. So just to be clear again, this class will get called whenever something happens on the network connection that we're creating. And so one of the things that we need to have happen is we need to have it send the nickname and the password. So let's see here. We'll create a nickname property and a password. So these are now properties of the class. And then in the constructor, we'll say nick equals underscore nick equals nick, and underscore password equals password. And then let's take a look at what methods we need to implement. So there are default implementations for everything except for connect failed, but they don't really do anything interesting. So let's just copying and pasting a little bit here, sorry. But first we're going to create a connected method. And for right now, let's not do anything except print out a message that says connected. And in order to use debug, we need to include the debug package. So this will print out connected whenever we connect. And then we want received. And let's see here. Let's just debug. We're really excited. We received some data, and we don't need to do these things. So let's just print out what we got. So we need to wrap it up in a string. Now we have to call this consume data. Or we have to use consume data. The reason for that is that data comes in with a reference capability of isolated. And what that means is that Pony will only let you have this one readable, writable reference to data. So that's what this ISO at the end means, is that this is the only reference that can be used to read and write to this data. Now, you can give up that reference by calling consume And what that does is it gets rid of that reference. And since Pony knows that that was the only readable, writable reference, you've now got this object kind of floating around that you can basically do anything with. So reference capabilities in Pony are Pony's way of controlling how different actors, which ends up being how different threads, can access a variable. So in this case, you were given an array of U8s, basically a character array, that only had this one thing that could reference it. So down here we call consume, that gets rid of that one reference, and now the object gets passed off to this from array method on string, and it creates a new string for you. The final thing here is true, so the last expression in a Pony function is the return value, and we're returning bool, which says, hey, if you have anything else to process, let us process it within this cycle of processing data. If we returned false, that would basically hand control back to the socket data processing whatever structure. So if you were processing a whole bunch of data, you could kind of give up control and say, hey, okay, I'm done for now. Let somebody else run. Okay, and let's see, and then the final thing that we need is this connect failed. And we don't want to do anything for right now. I guess we could just debug. So while I'm using exclamation points everywhere, just do that for connected too. Okay, so let's build this. We need to build with the debug flag, because that's the only way those debug messages will be printed out. Oh, I actually need to use this thing. So it's twit chat connection notify. So down here, I want to call Twitch chat connection notify, and I want to give it my Twitch nick and my password. And we need to do one other thing that I'll show you in just a minute. It didn't compile because I misspelled notify here. So sorry, I sometimes mistype things. Notify. Try building again. Okay, so we get this error that says argument not a subtype of parameter. This guy here. Argument type is Twitch chat connection notify ref, and parameter type is TCP connection notify ISO. So our Twitch chat connection notify should be a subclass of TCP connection notify. But the problem is this difference between ref and ISO. And again, this is where reference capabilities come in. So what this means is that the reference capability for the thing that we are passing in is less restrictive than the reference capability that is expected. So ref is less restrictive than ISO. Concretely, what that means is that if you have a ref, you can have multiple readable and writable references to that object. And if you have ISO, that means that you can only have one. And so we need to figure out a way to take this ref and turn it into an ISO, or to not have the thing be ref in the first place. So I'm going to go with not have it be ref in the first place. And the way we can do that is in the constructor, we can tell this constructor here to give us an ISO instead of a ref. So by default, class constructors will return ref instances unless you tell them otherwise. So this will give us back an ISO instance of this object. So now we should be able to build. Cool. We're building. Okay. So if I recall correctly, I don't think that Twitch actually sends us any information until we send information. So let's go ahead and try connecting, but I think it won't actually do anything, but it should just kind of sit there because we should be connected, and so I guess we'll see a connected message, hopefully. Connected. Great. Okay. Those are our two debugging statements, the nick equals and the got password. So we can probably remove those from our program. We'll do that. You know what? Let's just leave them in here. That way, if I screw something up, hopefully this will remind me. Okay, just remember the first two things that we see are not actually from the server. Okay, so we connected. Cool, so we made it to connected. So the next thing that we can do is we can start sending messages. And so what did we want to do? This tells us that we need to send our password and our nickname. So we need to send the line feed and the carriage return. Is that the right order? Oh, somebody tell me if that's the right order. Anybody watching? Sure. There we go. So if you've never used the IRC protocol, basically the way that it works is you send these messages and they have different formats, but you're sending things to the server, and so the server knows how to interpret them. And each message needs to be ended with a return and a new line. So if you don't have those, basically the server will just sit there and keep waiting for you to finish the message that you're sending. We'll assume you haven't finished it. So when I've written IRC clients in the past, sometimes I've forgotten that, and it's bad. Okay, and then we're going to send our nickname. And according to the documentation, if we send the correct password and the correct nickname, then we should see some sort of welcome message. So couldn't find send. Oh. So actually what we want is write. Sorry, I've been using things that wrap some of this, and yeah, so connection has a send, or sorry, a write method, not a send method. Okay, and so let's see what happens if we run this. We should see a connected message, and then we should send our password and our nickname, And then we should see that welcome message if we're lucky. Hey, that looks promising. So we received some data and we printed it out. So we're connected now. This is great. Watching but don't know the order, I see in the chat room. I don't see any context to this. I feel like I've missed a message. I see Brian saying no and watching but don't know the order. So sorry, if anybody has any more context, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'll assume everybody else knows what's going on. Cool. Okay, so we just connected to the IRC server. So the next thing we want to do is, oh, there's a couple of different things we can do. Let's leave this running, actually. And eventually we should see one of these ping messages, and then we can implement the Pong side of that. So in IRC, the server checks to make sure the client is still there by occasionally sending it a ping message, and the client is expected to return a Pong message within a certain amount of time. So we can show how that's done in a little bit here, but let's start with joining the channel. So let's get the famous Mr. Ed to join the channel and say something. So let's wait, and down here, let's see here. So if you've ever worked with, again, if you've ever worked with IRC, it's kind of an exciting protocol. One of the things about it, again, is that all the messages you send out are terminated by the carriage return new line, and all the messages that it sends you are terminated by a carriage return in a new line. TCP is a stream protocol, and so it will just send, on the receiving end, you will just get whatever bytes have been sent. So you may not get the full message all at once. You may get it broken up into pieces. In fact, if you look at our thing over here, you'll see that we have received data here, and then we have several lines. In fact, and then you'll see this one is broken up here. So basically, potentially, you don't get all of your data in one, or you don't get all of your message in one piece of data here. So in order to deal with that, let's create a message buffer. And we do that by using one way to do it is to use this buffered package. And that gives us a thing called a reader. And what a reader is, it's a class where you can shove bytes into it, and then you can pull them out as more useful things. For example, you could shove some bytes in, and then you could interpret them as a U64 number or something like that. So in our case, we want to shove bytes in, and then once we're done shoving the bytes in that we've received, we want to pull out as many messages as we can. So we've got this reader, and there's a method called append, and we're going to append our data. Oh, and let's see here. So we already consumed our data, so we actually couldn't use data like this here. So what I want to do is let's create a create a thing called data prime and make that an array u8 val. And now we have an array of u8s with a val reference capability. And what this means is that this is immutable. And so the nice thing about immutable data is that it can be shared between actors. So now we can hand copies of this around, or not copies, we can basically hand this thing around to anything that needs it, as long as the thing that needs it doesn't need a writable copy. And in our case, from array shouldn't need a writable copy, and append should not need a writable copy. And then we can say, so let's see here. Let's take a look at the documentation for the reader. Uh-oh, bye Polo. All right, my cat left, sorry. No cat to look at. So there's the append method. And I know there's a way to, line. Okay, this line method is the one that reads, and it returns either a new line or a carriage return new line terminated line as a string. So the other thing to keep in mind there for this thing is if it can't find a carriage return or new line, it raises an error. That's what this question mark means, is that this function can raise an error. So one thing that we could do here is we could create a loop that just loops over the reader and processes messages until it can't find a new line anymore. So let's do that. I'm just going to say that this thing's a string. Yeah, by default it returns a string ISO, ISO hat technically. Let's not worry too much about that other than to say that we can convert that into a val by doing this, and the val is probably what we really want. So we've got our line. And then what do we want to do with it? Let's do this in a while loop. So this is going to keep reading lines until it can't read a line. So there might be some data in here, but if there's not carriage return new line at the end, then it won't get returned to us, but it will stay inside the reader, so we can use it later. And this needs to be underscore reader, doesn't it? Yeah. And so once we hit a line, then let's call process message on line, and we're going to define a method called underscore process message. So it gets, call it message string, and let's go ahead and pass that connection as well. So let's actually call this message, and we're going to pass the connection as well, and that way we can write out to the connection from this process message method. So got this. So let's take a look. Oh, we got a ping. We haven't responded. It'll disconnect us soon. Um, so let's just look for a message that contains "you are in a maze of twisty passages all alike." So we're going to look for this and assume that once we've received that, we're fully connected and everything's good. So we're going to say if message contains the string, then let's join the room A turls. And let's take a look at this. So if I recall correctly, syntax is actually this: join space followed by a colon followed by the the octothorpe number sign, hashtag, whatever the kids call it these days. So the colon basically tells the IRC server, the way the IRC protocol is set up, it looks for a colon, and basically everything on the left side of the colon is I guess the command, and everything on the right side is the arguments. I'm probably putting that wrong. I'm probably saying that a little wrong. If we go look at the spec, we can find the correct wording, but that's effectively what it is. And we need the ampersand there because it's a channel. It's just a thing. Okay, so what will happen here is once we see this thing, once we see "you are in a maze of twisty passages all alike," we'll send it the join message, and that should join a channel. So let's build again. Expected due after condition, line 38. I think I forgot to put a while or do at the end of my while block. Yes, do. And call is partial, but the method call is not partial, but the method is. So I said that thing could raise that a call to line could raise an error. So we have to put a question mark at the end of it to indicate that it can raise an error. So there's a question mark at the end of the definition, so we have to have a question mark at the end of the usage. Okay, that compiled. So what should happen now is when we run, we'll connect. It will take our username and password. It will accept those. And then the bot will wait for that twisty passages line. And when it gets that, it will send a join message. And then the bot should join the channel. So we sent it a join. Here it is. Okay. So basically this is just information about the channel that we've joined. So hopefully the bot's here. So what happens if we say hello? We should see a hello message show up. So I'm going to type hello in the chat window. And yeah, it received a message from me that says hello. If anybody else is curious before we kill it and wants to send a hello message, go for it. Going once. Going twice. You know what I realized is there's a delay for you guys, and so you won't hear this for a little bit. Maybe you've already heard it now, but anyway. If anybody wants to type anything, I won't kill it yet. So, okay, so let's Oh, hey, look, there's a hello from blue-haired freak. Hello, sir. Here's your message that you sent. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So let's add the ability for our bot to say something to us, and it doesn't have to be anything super sophisticated. Let's do something real lazy. We'll look for this 366. This means this is the end of the thing that says that we're connected to our channel. Let's just look for that as part of the incoming message. So let's split our message into some parts based on spaces. And let's say if parts 1 is 366, string 366, then let's send a message. And to do that, we need one of these priv message. And then we need the channel name that we're sending it to, colon, and then the message that we want to send out. So let's just have it say something that Mr. Ed might say. I'm sorry. We're gonna write a little debug note to ourselves saying found 366. Okay, so let's rebuild. Okay, so we should run this. We'll send it our username and password. It will be happy with that. It will send us the twisty passages line. We will then request to join this channel. We should get a few messages, one of which should contain that 366 in the second position. That'll let us know that we're in the room, and then we should be able to send a message to the room. And that didn't work, and I think I know why. Yep. Okay, so remember what I said, if you don't have the carriage return new line, it doesn't know that you've finished sending your message, and so it won't process it being the server. So we have to put those on the end. Try that again. There it is. There's our message from our bot. Famous Mr. Ed says, Wilbur. Yeah. So there it is. I wouldn't say that this is anything super sophisticated, but hopefully you've now gotten an idea of how to do some network programming using Pony, and maybe learned a little bit about writing a Twitch bot. So if you wanted to take this and run with it, you could start writing your own network clients. If you look around in the documentation, you'll see some documentation about how to write a network server. So something that sits there and listens for connections and then responds to them. If you scroll down in the About Pony section here on Twitch, on my Twitch page, there's a thing called the Pony Workshop under Pony Reading. That tells you how to write a very simple chat server. So you could if you wanted to, you could make this as complex as you wanted to. You could start adding all kinds of features. If you wanted to, you could write a framework for writing pony chatbots where basically you had defined everything that was needed, and then people could, plug in their own classes that implemented certain behaviors when they saw certain messages or things like that. There's a lot of different things that you could do at this point. But hopefully you've gotten an idea of kind of the flavor of how the different pieces of a Pony program would work together to connect to a server and start sending messages to it and receiving messages from it. So yeah, that is my build an IRC bot, Twitch IRC bot from scratch and Pony stream. Thank you all for tuning in, and the video should be up, so if you know anybody who's curious about this, you can tell them, hey, this thing exists, go learn how to write network programs in Pony. Yeah, thanks all for tuning in. Stop by Twitter or something and tell me what you thought. Bye.